Howdy, I'm Flippin, we're looking at ecological succession. Um, um, so the science understandings we're going to look at: ecosystems can change over time. Ecological succession involves changes in biotic and abiotic components and their dynamic influence on each other, and describe examples of succession. So let's have a look at an example of succession. This is where my house is now, but there used to be a house there, and my house is the backyard over here. If we have a look, we can see it was bulldozed and the land was flattened. Then about 3 or so months later, we went back and we had a look and we took these photos. So you can see there's been some change. See some leaf matter building up, that's organic and that will decay. That gives a bit more nutrients to the soil and we start seeing weedy species have come in. So we're getting some grassy type stuff, we're getting a nice little weed here, some grassy type stuff and some small plants growing. This is succession because we have a change in the community present in the area, in the habitat. So we've gone from having no plants to having plenty of plants. So let's talk about succession. So organisms occupy specific habitats because their needs are met by that habitat. And they also have particular adaptations that allow them to survive and reproduce there. Succession is where the species composition of a community changes over time. This is caused by the species that are present themselves, as well as changes in the abiotic components of the ecosystem. But the key thing is the presence of the biotic components change over time, and because there's change, we get new biotic components coming in, and we get changes of species. So how does succession happen? Organisms change their habitat in a variety of ways. They might be providing food or shelter. One species might be providing food or shelter for other species. So a good example is trees. So trees trap the sun's energy. They provide food and shelter for various bird species. The bird species coming along might be bringing seeds that they're carrying within them, and that might lead to new species of plants growing. Trees can also start to break up rock, so roots can go into the soil and they can break up rocks. They can also change the composition of the soil by when we have leaves falling on them, the organic matter can break down the leaves and that can change the nutrient makeup of the soil. We get more decomposition of dead material, and that means there's more nutrients available, and that means more species might be able to come in. If we look at habitats that are completely devoid of life, then we can have a look at succession as it occurs. A good example of this is a lava flow. So this is a lava flow. So the lava coming out of a volcano, it solidifies into rock, and that rock is very, very solid. Over time, we get that rock breaking down, and this is broken down by things like lichens. So lichens will establish themselves on bare rock. The lichen dissolves away the minerals in the rock, and that breaks it up into smaller bits. So since they're breaking it down, we get smaller and smaller bits, and then this leads to the first traces of soil that are starting to form. As the lichens die, decomposers can act on the lichens and start to produce nutrients that go into this proto-soil. Mosses might be able to survive in these new conditions. And as time progresses, we get further breakdown and decomposition of the organic matter that's present there, and we get further breakdown of the rocks and the soil. So then we get things like grasses, shrubs, and herbaceous plants moving in. So these are all small plants. As we get plants moving in, we get consumers starting to come in too. So we get birds that will follow the plants as they come in. And also flying insects, of course, since they can move from area to area. As we get these insects and birds coming in, we get things like seeds being carried, we get pollinators coming around. So we get the opportunity for seeds to be dispersed and also for pollination of other plant species to occur. And this process continues. As succession continues, you get one group of organisms being replaced by other organisms. As the ecosystem matures, we get slower growing species replacing really fast growing weedy species, if we're talking about plants in particular. So the vacant lot where my house was, we had weedy species in there, but if we gave that enough time, we would get big trees coming in too. In a mature ecosystem, the organisms put a lot less effort into reproduction, and they're usually bigger, they live longer, and they have more complex life cycles. So we can see that here. So we have new species coming in, replacing old species with dead trees that are falling over, and then we get to our what we call a climax community, which is where you have a very stable ecosystem. So succession is broken up into two types, primary and secondary succession. Primary succession is where you're starting from brand new. So our example of the volcanic island with the lava flow, but a sand dune is also a good place to watch primary succession occurring. Secondary succession occurs where there's been a disturbance in the ecosystem, so some damage or disaster, and we're getting succession occurring from there. So my vacant lot is an example of that. There was soil there present. There is seeds already in the soil from other plant species. There are birds in the area. So the changes in my vacant lot, that's an example of secondary succession. Good examples of secondary succession are things like fires, and this is particular in the Australian ecosystem. We're going to talk about this a bit later on. Secondary succession is a lot quicker than primary succession. Primary succession can take hundreds to thousands of years, whereas secondary succession might take hundreds of years to get to the climax community. The reason for this is there's already soil present. There's also already plant species that are nearby normally, and there's already animals that are able to make it to the area to help with the recolonization. So as I mentioned before, fire is very important in Australian ecosystems. It clears out small weedy things and allows your bigger gum trees to survive. In fact, there's adaptations that cause the gum trees to survive when fires are coming. It also stimulates the germination of particular plants. Fire itself doesn't, but we know that it's the smoke that does. So having the smoke that leads to germination of those plants, that means those plants can reproduce, and then they take their place in the ecosystem. So I teach at a school that's right next to sand dunes. Sand dunes aren't particularly hospitable because there's high temperatures, high wind, low water availability, low nutrients, and large amounts of salt. And because of this, we can see great examples of succession occurring along the sand dune as you go from where the beach is further away. There are some species of plants that can survive the very hostile environments present on a sand dune. So the spinifex roots of plants are a good example. They stabilize the sand dunes with runners, so these are roots that run along the top of the sand dune. And because they stabilize, that means that you can get organic matter starting to build up. So as the organic matter builds up, you start to get more nutrients going into the sand, and then we can start getting other plants starting to survive. So the further back you go, the more nutrients you have in the soil, and you get things like grasses, pigface, this is pigface over here, and other small herbaceous plants being present in the ecosystem. Again, more and more organic matter builds up due to the action of decomposers and the excretion of waste material from consumers, and so we get more nutrients being present in the sand, and the sand is turned into soil. With greater soil depth, you get more nutrients, and you also get higher water retention. So more water and rainwater, not salt water, is being retained within the sand dune. And because there's water available, and now the environment becomes capable of establishing woodland communities with larger trees that are present. So we might get forest trees and the associated organisms with that. So here you can see we've got kind of sand dunes, we've got lots of sand at the start, then we start getting our grassy species, then we start getting some trees, and then we get a forest at the back. So sand dunes are really good examples of places where you can see succession occurring. So Flippin Science, we'll look at succession. Thanks for Flippin Science today. See ya.